In September 2014, a woman named Brittany Gould walked into a Walgreens in Arizona. She had already survived 3 miscarriages. She was pregnant again and terrified. She saw a blood testing kiosk promising results from just a few drops of blood. Fast, painless, revolutionary. She took the test. It came back showing her hormone levels consistent with a miscarriage in progress. She was told her pregnancy was likely failing. It wasn't true. The test was wrong. The company behind it was called Theranos. Its machine, the one that just told a terrified pregnant woman she was losing her baby, had never been properly validated for that test at all. Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was called the next Steve Jobs. She wore his exact style of black turtleneck. She lowered her voice to sound more authoritative. She sat on magazine covers as the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. Nearly all of it was built on a machine that didn't work. This is the bust files. Elizabeth Holmes enrolled at Stanford University in 2002 to study chemical engineering. She was 19 years old, and she was already telling people she was going to be a billionaire. Not someday soon, and specifically. She dropped out after her freshman year, using the tuition money her parents had saved to start a company instead. Her original idea was a wearable patch that could detect infections and automatically administer medication. That idea evolved and eventually narrowed into something more specific, a machine that could run dozens of medical tests using only a tiny prick of blood from a fingertip instead of the multiple vials drawn from a vein in a traditional blood draw. She called the device the Edison. The pitch was genuinely revolutionary if it worked. Cheaper testing, faster results, no needles. Available in ordinary retail pharmacies, not just hospitals and labs. Holmes described it as the beginning of a new era in preventative medicine, catching diseases earlier, saving lives, democratizing healthcare. She was, by every account, an extraordinarily effective salesperson. She held eye contact without blinking. She spoke slowly, deliberately, in a voice noticeably deeper than the one former classmates remembered from college, a choice many who knew her would later say was deliberate. And she built, around this pitch, one of the most prestigious boards of directors in Silicon Valley history. Theranos' board of directors read like a foreign policy cabinet, not a biotech startup. Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State George Shultz, former Secretary of Defense James Mattis, former Senator Sam Nunn, former Wells Fargo CEO Richard Kovacevic. None of them were doctors. None of them were clinical laboratory scientists. None of them had the specific expertise to properly evaluate whether a blood testing device actually worked. What they had was credibility, the kind that made investors assume someone, somewhere, must have checked. If Henry Kissinger was willing to put his name on this, surely it was real. That credibility helped Theranos raise more than $700 million from investors. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch invested over $100 million personally. The Walton family of Walmart invested heavily. Betsy DeVos, who would later become US Secretary of Education, and her family invested more than $100 million as well. By 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, still in her 20s, was named the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet, with a personal net worth estimated at $4.5 billion. Nobody on that board had run the test themselves. Here's exactly how Theranos hid a machine that didn't work behind one of the most celebrated names in Silicon Valley. The core problem was simple. The Edison device Holmes had promised investors, regulators, and the public, the miniaturized machine capable of running hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood, never actually worked reliably. According to court testimony and internal documents, only a small fraction of the tests Theranos offered were ever run on Edison machines at all. Some reports put that number as low as 15 out of 240 advertised tests. So Theranos did something else instead. They secretly purchased conventional, Commercially available blood testing machines from established companies like Siemens, the same kind of large lab equipment used in every ordinary hospital and clinic in America. To make the tiny finger prick blood samples work on machines designed for much larger vein-drawn samples, Theranos employees diluted the patient blood samples significantly, stretching a small amount of blood to fill the volume the traditional machines expected. That dilution process introduced serious inaccuracies into the results. Diluted blood doesn't behave the same way as whole blood inside diagnostic equipment calibrated for full samples. The tests came back with errors sometimes minor, sometimes catastrophic, like telling a pregnant woman she was miscarrying when she wasn't. Patients were never told any of this. Their test reports listed Theranos' own lab as the testing site, the company's own machines, their own revolutionary technology. It was, in investigative journalist John Carreyrou's words, an unauthorized medical experiment being run on real patients who believed they were receiving validated medical care. In 2013, Theranos announced a partnership that would change everything, a deal with Walgreens, one of the largest pharmacy chains in the United States. The plan was to install Theranos wellness centers inside Walgreens stores nationwide, starting with 40 locations across Arizona, giving ordinary customers walk-in access to Theranos blood testing without a paid doctor's referral, without an appointment, without ever setting foot in a hospital. This deal gave Theranos something priceless: mainstream retail credibility. It transformed an unproven Silicon Valley startup into something that looked, to an ordinary customer walking into their neighborhood pharmacy, exactly like a validated medical service. Behind the scenes, Theranos was racing against its own deadline. When the wellness centers actually opened, the technology still wasn't ready. Rather than delay the launch and risk the partnership, Theranos moved forward anyway, running the vast majority of tests on the secretly repurposed conventional machines with diluted samples, while telling Walgreens and the public that its own proprietary technology was doing the work. Real patients, not investors, not board members, but ordinary people making real medical decisions, began walking into Arizona Walgreens stores and receiving blood test results built on this hidden foundation. Inside Theranos, not everyone believed what Elizabeth Holmes was telling the world. Tyler Shultz, grandson of board member George Shultz, joined Theranos in 2013, right as the Walgreens partnership was announced. He expected to be working with genuinely revolutionary technology. What he found instead was troubling. The Edison machines malfunctioned constantly. Components fell off mid-test. Doors wouldn't close properly. The devices overheated, then undercooled. Multiple employees later testified that they could not reliably complete accurate tests on the machines Theranos was manufacturing. Erica Chung, another young employee, independently noticed the same problems: statistical data being manipulated, quality control failures being ignored or covered up, test results going out to patients despite known accuracy problems. Both Chung and Shultz raised their concerns internally. Both were met with resistance, and both eventually left the company. Chung wrote directly to federal regulators at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, describing serious problems with Theranos' laboratory practices. Shultz began speaking with a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou. Theranos' response to internal dissent was aggressive. The company threatened both whistleblowers with expensive litigation. Tyler Shultz's own grandfather, a Theranos board member, initially sided with the company over his grandson. Years earlier, in 2013, a Theranos scientist named Ian Gibbons had taken his own life after struggling with the pressures of working under Holmes at the company, a tragedy that would later be cited as an early sign of the culture inside Theranos. In October 2015, John Carreyrou published his findings in the Wall Street Journal. The headline finding was devastating in its simplicity. Theranos ran less than 10% of its advertised tests on its own Edison machines. The rest were run on conventional equipment from other manufacturers' equipment Theranos had told investors, regulators, and the public it didn't need. Theranos denied the reporting. The company threatened legal action against Carreyrou and against its own former employees who had spoken to him. Elizabeth Holmes went on television to insist the story was wrong. But regulators were already watching. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched surprise inspections of Theranos' laboratories. What they found led them to conclude the lab posed, in their own words, immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. In 2016, Theranos was forced to void nearly 1 million test results that had already been sent to real patients, a full 2 years' worth of blood tests, many of which had informed real medical decisions, now retroactively acknowledged as potentially unreliable. Walgreens ended the partnership and later sued Theranos, eventually settling for a fraction of the $140 million it had invested. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened its own investigation into whether Holmes and her business partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who was also her secret romantic partner throughout much of this period, had knowingly misled investors. By 2018, Theranos was finished. Elizabeth Holmes stepped down as CEO. The company, once valued at $9 billion, officially ceased operations. Investors who had poured in more than $700 million watched their stakes become worthless overnight. Rupert Murdoch lost more than $100 million personally. Betsy DeVos and her family lost more than $100 million. The board members who had lent their names and reputations, Kissinger, Shultz, Mattis, watched their credibility become part of the story of how the fraud had worked, rather than proof that it hadn't. The Securities and Exchange Commission formally charged both Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud, alleging they had raised hundreds of millions of dollars from investors through what regulators called an elaborate, years-long fraud, deceiving investors into believing that Theranos' technology was actually working as claimed. Criminal charges followed. Holmes and Balwani were indicted separately on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The trial that followed would become one of the most closely watched corporate fraud cases in American history. Elizabeth Holmes' criminal trial began in 2021. Prosecutors built their case around a central argument. Holmes knew the Edison technology didn't work as promised and deliberately misled investors, business partners, and patients anyway, in pursuit of money and fame. One of the most devastating moments of the trial came when Brittany Gould, the pregnant woman from Arizona, testified. She described taking a Theranos test at her local Walgreens after 3 previous miscarriages, desperate for reassurance about her 4th pregnancy. Instead, the test falsely indicated she was miscarrying again. The false result nearly drove her to end a pregnancy that, it turned out, had never actually been at risk. Holmes took the stand in her own defense, a significant legal risk. She testified that she had relied on legal advice regarding what to disclose to Walgreens about the company's use of third-party machines, framing the secrecy as protection of trade secrets rather than deliberate deception of a business partner and, by extension, patients. The jury wasn't convinced on every count. In January 2022, Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy related to defrauding investors. She was acquitted on charges specifically related to defrauding patients, a distinction her legal team would later point to. Even as prosecutors and victims argued the human cost was inseparable from the financial fraud, regardless of the verdict's technical boundaries. In November 2022, Judge Edward Davila sentenced Holmes to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Elizabeth Holmes did not go to prison immediately. Her legal team fought her surrender for more than a year, filing motion after motion to remain free while she appealed her conviction. In April 2023, a federal judge finally denied her request to stay out of prison during her appeal, but even then, an automatic stay triggered by the appeal itself kept her free for weeks longer. Her attorneys argued, among other things, that the judge's original ruling had contained errors, including a reference to patient fraud convictions that didn't exist, since the jury had specifically acquitted Holmes on the patient fraud counts. Sunny Balwani, convicted separately on 12 counts of fraud and sentenced to nearly 13 years, had already exhausted his own appeals and reported to a low-security federal prison in California. Finally, on the 30th of May 2023, Elizabeth Holmes reported to a minimum security women's prison camp in Texas to begin serving her sentence, becoming, at last, not a Silicon Valley visionary, but a federal inmate. In 2024, a federal appeals court, the Ninth Circuit, reviewed and fully upheld Holmes's conviction, rejecting every argument her legal team raised. The court also upheld the $452 million in restitution Holmes and Balwani were ordered to pay to their victims. Prison records later showed something that raised eyebrows. Holmes's projected release date had been quietly reduced by nearly 3 years through standard credit programs, moving her expected release from roughly 2032 to the 30th of December 2031. In early 2026, it was reported that Holmes had asked President Donald Trump for an early release from prison, seeking to have her sentence commuted, a request that, if granted, could see her released nearly 6 years ahead of schedule. As of this recording, that request remains unresolved. Balwani's projected release, similarly reduced through credit programs, now sits at April 2033. Holmes has continued to maintain, both during and after her trial, that she genuinely believed in Theranos' technology and its mission, even as the human cost of that belief played out in real patients receiving false medical information about their own bodies. The Theranos story gets told, often, as a story about Silicon Valley hype, fake it till you make it, taken to its most extreme and consequential conclusion. That framing misses something important. This wasn't a social media app that failed to hit its user growth projections. This was a medical device company, putting inaccurate diagnostic results directly into the hands of real people making real decisions about their own health. A pregnant woman told she was losing her baby, patients receiving false readings on cancer markers, cholesterol, and dozens of other conditions that inform real medical choices. The system that was supposed to catch this Theranos' own board of directors was built for prestige, not oversight. Kissinger, Shultz, Mattis brought credibility, connections, and gravitas. None of them brought the specific expertise to ask the one question that mattered: does the machine actually work? Nobody with the power to stop this asked that question early enough. It took 2 low-level employees willing to risk their careers and face legal threats, and 1 investigative journalist to finally force the truth into the open nearly a decade after the company was founded, and only after nearly 1 million patients had already received test results built on a foundation that didn't hold. The money always leaves a trail. Sometimes so does the harm, and sometimes that trail runs straight through a pharmacy blood test kiosk into the body of a frightened, pregnant woman who trusted what she was told. Follow the bust files, because somewhere right now, someone else is promising a machine that doesn't quite work yet and hoping nobody checks before the money runs out. $9 billion in valuation, nearly 1 million invalidated test results, 11 years in prison. And somewhere in Arizona, a mother who still remembers exactly what that test told her. Subscribe. New case file every week. The bust files. The money always leaves a trail. We just follow it.